President-elect Joe Biden says he plans to address climate change as soon as he takes office. But there are concerns about how much he can really do if Georgia's 2 Senate runoff elections lead to a Republican-controlled Senate. CBS News meteorologist and climate specialist Jeff Berardelli reports.
The United States will cease all implementation of the non-binding Paris Accord.
Just 6 months after the landmark 2016 Paris Climate Agreement was ratified, President Trump announced the U.S. would be pulling out.
Every country in the world signed on to the Paris Climate Agreement. The U.S. is the only country that withdrew. Not a single world leader other than Donald Trump is denying climate change.
Michael Gerard is a climate law professor at Columbia University. He says so far the Trump administration has taken over 150 actions to reverse environmental regulations. But Gerard feels that's all about to change. He says there's a lot President-elect Joe Biden can do with just the stroke of a pen, without congressional approval.
Well, on day one, he'll rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement. He will revoke the executive orders that Trump issued to encourage fossil fuel use.
One of the major rollbacks from the Trump administration was weakening fuel economy standards set by President Obama. Gerard says this is one angle Mr. Biden can target and make a big impact without Congress.
Trump is repealing those. Biden can restore the prior levels and go beyond them to have even cleaner cars, lower emitting cars in the years going forward.
Gerard also expects the president-elect to reinstate a ban on new fossil fuel extraction from federal land and protected areas like the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. And the Biden administration could also give a boost to renewable energy projects.
Biden obviously wants to do a lot of his work on climate change by pouring a lot of money and resources into renewable energy.
When I think about climate change, the word I think of is jobs.
Is there much that he can do without the cooperation of the legislature?
The private sector is ready, willing, and able to make major investments in renewable energy if they get the government go-ahead. There are a lot of offshore wind projects that are poised to go. The Trump administration has been slow walking them. I'm sure that once Biden is inaugurated, the government will move much more quickly in approving these projects.
Now, while there's a lot Mr. Biden can do alone, he will need the cooperation from a sharply divided Congress to achieve even a modest amount of his $2 trillion climate agenda, especially if he wants his climate initiatives to endure.
Nobody likes the ping pong back and forth between administrations. We saw Obama put in place regulations. We saw Trump rescind some of them. We will likely see Biden put some back in place. And that's not good for the climate, and it's not good for business or the economy.
Despite the back and forth, Ben Pendergrass from the grassroots organization Citizens Climate Lobby is already seeing some progress on Capitol Hill. He says, unlike a few years ago, he no longer has conversations with lawmakers who outright deny the need for climate action.
With more and more bills that have bipartisan support in the clean energy space, those things have been steadily advancing and gaining more traction. We have seen on the ground like Republicans being much more receptive to messages on climate action.
Since there's not much appetite in Republican circles to limit the use of gas and oil, Pendergrass does see potential agreement on carbon capture technology. While it's expensive and not quite ready for mass implementation, the hope is that further investment would make it more viable, limiting emissions from fossil fuel facilities and sucking out carbon from the atmosphere. Science agrees carbon capture is necessary, but many argue it's just a band-aid to avoid dealing with our addiction to fossil fuels.
When I hear carbon sequestration, the first thing I think is, oh, okay, so nothing's going to get done. I mean, that's at least my reaction to it.
I think in some ways that's understandable if we were talking about that being the only thing.
But there are other ways to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, including putting a tax on carbon emissions. That means any products or services in which fossil fuels are used will cost a little bit more. This would guide society to use more affordable renewable energy sources. Pendergrass thinks there just may be some congressional interest in this.
There's not an economist you will meet that doesn't prefer a carbon price over any other approach. It's efficient, it gets the job done.
Beyond that, Pendergrass feels there may be some agreement on infrastructure spending to support a new low-carbon economy, like constructing electricity transmission lines and vehicle recharging stations. Agriculture could also play a key role in addressing the climate challenge. There may be some appetite to create markets to incentivize farmers to use their soil to sequester carbon. Above all, experts say embracing science will help re-energize the country's climate agenda.
One of Trump's worst actions was to squelch science. Biden will put into office cabinet officers and sub-cabinet officers who believe, as he does, that climate change is an existential threat and not a Chinese hoax. There has been jubilation among leaders around the world in knowing that we're finally, again, going to have a U.S. president who is with them on fighting climate change.